So in this video, we're going to focus on the Land Ordinance of 1785 and how the Northwest Territory will be settled. In another video, we'll look at how that territory will then become part of the United States. So notice the Northwest Territory. That's this grayed out section, this section here of the United States. We call it the Northwest Territory because at that time, that is the northern and westernmost territory of the United States. If you kind of draw a line down the middle and across the middle, this is in the Northwest quadrant because you remember the Mississippi River is the far western boundary of the United States after the Treaty of Paris of 1783. And so how is this territory going to be settled? What are we going to do with all this territory? Well, first, we have to determine who really owns the territory. Because as you can see, there's many different states that all claim this territory. And so the first problem that has to be solved is who really owns the territory? Well, during the period of the Articles of Confederation, the federal government or the national government, the Continental Congress, was able to convince the states to cede that territory to the United States so that wouldn't be a point of argument. It was a point of argument, but this is settled during this time, and all of this territory is given to the United States by these various individual states. Jefferson has a plan of how to divide that territory in different states that they could be named, and you can see there's some of those state names are pretty close to the names that end up being used at that time, but many of them are not, and he obviously has many more states than ultimately become states in that region. And then there's the other problem, that land is already occupied primarily by Native Americans. We can see various Native American groups represented by these different letters that are, and the darker, kind of the stronger a hold that territory is held by that group. It's a maybe more condensed area or a higher population. Some of the lighter shading may represent a lower population and things of that nature. And these are general areas. They're not exact areas that these different Native Americans are occupied. But then it's not only Native Americans that occupy this territory. There's also a significant number of squatters. In other words, Americans who have moved there and they didn't have a legal right to the territory. They simply moved out there, built a house, built a farm, and started living there, and there was nobody there really to stop them. So that problem is going to have to be solved. First, what are you going to do with the squatters? They're going to tell them they have to leave. And what are you going to do with the Native Americans? Well, the plan for the Native Americans, they consider war, but they ultimately decide, let's go with, we'll send a militia out there. Let's kind of negotiate treaties. Let's pay for this territory, pay them for their land, and see what happens. Ultimately, many of these treaties fail, and in many cases because the United States does not honor some of the treaties that they themselves signed. So this gets us to the Land Ordinance of 1785. How was it divided? Well, each territory would be divided into townships, and each township was 36 square miles, and the township would be divided into sections that are 1 square mile or 640 acres. And so if this is the territory, it's divided up into townships, and then each township would be 36 square miles, 6 miles across, 6 miles down. 6 times 6 is 36, and that's 36 square miles. And one section, and we'll blow this picture up on another slide here in just a second, and you'll see the sections divided up. One township would then be divided into sections as well, 636 sections. And one section is made up of 640 acres. And you can see here that 1 acre is pretty close to the size of a football field. And so you can kind of picture what 640 acres would look like, a significant portion of land. So 31 of the 36 sections were auctioned to the public. Sections were only available initially to citizens who could purchase an entire section. And bidding began at $640 or $1 per acre. $1 per acre sounds great now. It was pretty pricey then. So many of the people, really the only people that could afford to buy a whole section, were fairly wealthy because you had to have the money to do that. And to have that much money meant you were wealthy. And so lots of people would buy many people that could afford it, known as land speculators, would buy lots and lots of land and then try to sell it off at a profit. And they, in many cases, were able to do so because they had good land, and there was a lot of people that wanted to move out there but couldn't afford that, to buy so much land, and so they would be forced to buy a smaller piece of land at a higher price than $1 per acre, but it still gave them enough land for themselves, perhaps, and their family. So here we can see how some of the sections would be given to veterans to pay off what the government owed them. So veterans from the American Revolution, one of the ways that they were able to keep some of the veterans in the war at times when they couldn't pay them was the promise of land. And so they were able to make good on those promises by giving veterans this territory, some of the territory out here in the Northwest Territory. Another section, the sale of the money basically for the sale of that section was reserved to go to pay for a school in that township. And so that's really the land ordinance of 1785 and how it worked. They divided the territory into townships and then the township into sections. And so each one of these squares is 640 acres and would cost $640. And then you can see that veterans would be given 4 sections, and not necessarily those 4, and one would be associated. The money that would be sold would go to a school in that area. So that's the land ordinance of 1785.